Welcome to Breakthrough Success. I'm your host, Marc Guberti, founder of the Content Marketing Plaza, bringing you 3 new episodes each week where I and top-level guests teach you how to take your business to the next level and achieve your breakthrough. And before we jump into today's episode, let me ask you a quick question. How much would your life change if you could make 6 figures from your content? Imagine being able to quit your 9-to-5 job, do what you love for a living, and spend more time with your family. That's what we help our students do at the Content Marketing Plaza, an 8-week program that will help you build your way to 6 figures via your content. You can learn more about the Plaza by heading over to contentmarketingplaza.com, which will be in the show notes. All right, let's jump right back into the episode. One of the things that we need to continue developing on is our expertise. And whether you are just getting started on developing a new skill or you feel like you are an expert already, we have to continue to develop our expertise. And we're going to talk about in this episode how exactly we go about doing that so we can become dominant players within our niches. So today's guest is the co-founder of Degreed and co-author of The Expertise Economy, How the Smartest Companies Use Learning to Engage, Compete, and Succeed. And he has spent his career innovating higher education and lifelong learning. Prior to Degreed, he helped launch a competency-based accredited university and was a founding team member at Cinch, which was acquired by Chegg. He was selected as a top EdTech entrepreneur by the Stanford D-School EdTech Lab, sponsored by Teach for America and New Schools Venture Fund. He has been published in the Harvard Technology Review, Business Insider, TechCrunch, and Huffington Post. He has spoken around the world on topics of the future of learning, including the ASU Education Innovation Summit, EdTech Europe, and TEDx. Today's guest for episode 319 of the Breakthrough Success Podcast is none other than David Blake. David, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it, man. It's great to be here.
David, I'm very happy to have you on the Breakthrough Success Podcast, and expertise is definitely something we all need to develop on, so we'll talk about that. Before we do, though, can you share some of the backstory about your book, The Expertise Economy, and why you decided to write it with your co-author, Kelly Palmer?
Absolutely. I think, a lot of it was just we've seen how the world has shifted and how we all have to adapt to that. And the shift that I think we're all sort of reeling to deal with is the world before the internet. Information used to be hard to come by. And now in this post-internet world, information is abundant. And that's a pretty big fundamental shift when you start thinking about expertise, skills, knowledge, education, all of those things. Because once upon a time, to get an education, it was really hard because information was inaccessible. And so the role that companies and universities played was to be the organizations that would go out there and gather up all that information for us. And that was immensely valuable because otherwise it was really hard for us to access that expertise. Now, information is abundant. We're swimming in it. We can Google, we can go to YouTube, we can learn pretty much anything we need. It's been democratized, it's accessible to us. And that leaves everyone sort of shrugging their shoulders saying, what do we do now? And so as Kelly and I had the opportunity in our careers and then together at Degreed to work with some of the most innovative organizations, really in the US and in the world, from NASA's Jet Propulsion Labs to Boeing, Intel, and Cisco to Citigroup and Bank of America, big multinational, very innovative organizations. We began to see the differences that these organizations that embrace learning and are starting to put the development of their people ahead of the old ways of thinking about training and just the competitive advantage that it was. And so we had a lot of people asking us, how do I do this? What does it mean? What's my role? And we sat down to write the book so everyone could have a blueprint for, what this future of expertise looks like.
And you mentioned some of the companies that you were able to come in contact with during this whole process of writing the book? Some of them Google, LinkedIn, Airbnb, the list really goes on and on. But what were some of the biggest lessons learned as you interviewed some of the people within these big corporations?
Yeah, I think from the company perspective, I think in the old world, companies were very company-centric. Training was about, what do we need? As a company, what do we need? And so the courses and the tools and the technology, they all reflected that, and we felt that. As employees, I think we've all got experiences, and we just know that, hey, that training, that wasn't about making me better. That was about checking some box for the company. And I think the biggest difference is that the organizations that have been able to make this shift to a very employee-centric, how do we help our people upgrade themselves? That's, I think, fundamentally one of the biggest shifts that organizations can make. And it's a bit of a leap, but, in this world where the rate of change, the rate of acceleration, the amount of information, the amount of data, when it's just all accelerating so fast, to think that an organization can keep up with that anymore is just impossible, unless you empower people. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest shifts between the companies that sort of, are embracing the future and those that are sort of stuck.
And I really like that employee-centric model, because the employees, they are the people who they perform all the vital operations for the company to grow. The CEO is more of a thinker, a visionary, where they make all the key decisions, but there still have to be a lot of people who are putting in the work for that corporation to grow. And this applies to entrepreneurs also, who maybe just small businesses, for instance, who have a smaller staff than these big corporations. It applies just to anyone who is thinking about hiring people. But looking at the other side, let's say that you are someone who maybe you're looking for a job, maybe you're a side hustler or an entrepreneur, and you have to develop your expertise in a certain area. So my question is, how do we continue to develop expertise, especially when it comes to an industry that can change so quickly, something like Facebook ads, for example?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. One of the biggest shifts, and the people who I've seen who really can develop their expertise well on an ongoing basis, I think it's all about framing and being deliberate in the development of your skill. And that might sound simple, but let me draw it out just a little bit, which is, we're used to coming, we came through an education system. It was developed when the industrial era, assembly lines, we sit in rows, we sit in desks, we all sort of march through the process together. It was all very, industrial. And what we become accustomed to is, in that model, we essentially were the cog on the conveyor belt. You sort of just hop on and the system, pushes you through. And we don't appreciate that there was all this machinery, for better and worse. There was all this machinery around us. We never had to think about what textbook should we read. Someone picked that for us. We never thought about the networks that were around us. The school put us together in a classroom. Teachers, all these things were sort of done for us, and it was always just our job to sort of, come to the trough and eat. Well, in a world where you have to take ownership of your own expertise, none of that is being done for you. No one's picking out what books for you to read. No one's picking out which articles are good and which ones aren't. And so I think one of the biggest things that can distinguish someone who's a great lifelong learner and someone who's just sort of swimming in it is being that intentional, deliberate lifelong learner and owning your expertise. And so you have to appreciate that now, again, we're in this world where information is abundant. And so the job that we have to do is being good at establishing, filtering through the noise. What am I going to read? Who are the sources of my mentorship, of expertise that I'm going to follow that are helping me to pull me forward and to curate learning, that can help validate the sources that are out there. Set a goal. I mean, it's amazing to me. I go around the world and I speak mostly to either educators or people in HR or that are in learning and development. That's a lot of who I speak to. And so these audiences are people who should be deeply invested in this. And I will ask, in the audience, raise your hand if you have a goal for your own personal learning. And you usually see about 5% of the hands, go up. That should be the audience that cares the very most about learning and self-improvement, is educators and people in learning and development and instructional designers and, professors and teachers. And yet, very few people have a goal, a stated goal for their learning. And I think what most of us do is we just wake up, we hit Facebook, we hit Twitter, we hit LinkedIn. We do have these feeds, and they are sort of curated. You chose to follow people, but you're just sort of letting the waves crash over you, and you aren't being very deliberate. So I think that's one of the biggest distinctions. Set a goal, create a framework, get good at filtering through the noise, and you actually really have to sort of stay focused. And if you can do that, you can really accelerate the pace at which you're able to develop yourself.
And you mentioned that idea of setting a goal for your learning, which whether it's listening to a certain number of podcast episodes each week, reading a certain number of articles, you set that goal, and it's definitely going to be easier for you to learn more knowledge and become the expert in your niche. But part of becoming the expert is to have others who know that you are the expert. So you can know all the expertise, but if no one knows about you, then you can't impact people with your expertise from the entrepreneurial standpoint, from the job standpoint. You can't get hired unless people know you're an expert. So how can we then showcase our expertise the right way?
Yeah, this is, we have to create signals. And this is one of the things I'm most passionate about and led me to start Degreed. I really started Degreed as I began to ask more and more people this question: tell me about your education. And you ask people that question, and the only answer that you get is always framed in terms of college degree, or even that I didn't go to college. So you'll ask someone, tell me about your education. They say, oh, I graduated in economics from SMU. I graduated in biology from Oregon State. Or you'll say, tell me about your education. And I had, a woman, mid-50s, asked her the question, tell me about your education. And she said, oh, I'm not educated. I didn't go to university. And that just struck me, for those of us who did go to university, I graduated from university. For those of us who went, we know full well that, me, I'm out of it by 15 years. She was out of, she was 30 years past when she would have gone to university. Those 2 or 4 or 6 years, 30 years ago, have nothing to do with whether or not you're an educated person now. They have nothing to do with what's in your head now. And just think how absurd it is. Think if I asked you, tell me about your health. And you said, oh, Dave, I ran a marathon 30 years ago. That's it. It's not that degrees are bad, and it's not that university is bad. That isn't my argument. Marathons aren't bad either. But we all know that your health today, in this moment, is in such a teeny fraction anyway related to the fact that you might have been able to run a marathon 30 years ago. And yet that's how we answer for our education, for our knowledge, for our skills. And so that's one of the things I'm very most passionate about. And the advice I would give people is we do have to create the signal. And there's now a lot of ways that you can do that. So Degreed is a way that you can come and you can get certified in your skills. But there's also now many others. We have the traditional, there's alternative sort of certifications, professional certifications, industry certifications. Those are good ways of being able to help people understand what skills that you have. But I think as we get to where even those are sort of insufficient to give an ongoing reflection of what we're learning, think about the ways that you can signal your expertise. And I think, focused blog posts. You can go and get now micro credentials. You can take singular courses. There's assessment platforms out there. There's different badging platforms. There's quite a few ways you can do it. But what that does for you is now all of a sudden people can understand what your skills are today rather than, what your formal training was 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago.
And it's interesting you make that distinction because it's about what you're doing now. I mean, the education you have in the past, that's good background, but you need to continue to educate yourself and spread the expertise that you have in the specific areas that you're going after. And there are a lot of people who perhaps they want to become an expert or something. They want to know the ins and outs of this particular marketing channel or this a way to create content more consistently. So with this in mind, what do you believe holds most people back from being able to reach the expert status in the area that they are after?
Yeah, Microsoft CEO talked about, they want to be an organization of learners, not an organization of knowers. And I think sometimes that's one of the final barriers, is that we think we think we know something. We think we're the expert, and so you start to hold on tight to your expertise. And I think, in this world, it's that last step of always staying at the top of your game, always being a industry, expert. More than anyone else, you sort of always have to be open to the shifts, the changes, that breakthrough that fundamentally eradicates the expertise that you had last week, and that means that you've got to go and learn that new platform, that new tool, that new system, especially in marketing. The rules can change. I grew up in marketing, doing a lot of SEO at a time where, every time the algorithm would change, it changed the game. And, and so you don't ever want to find yourself amongst the knowers. Eric Hoffer has a great quote. It's one of my very favorites. He said, "In times of great change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists." So I think you just always got to stay open.
And I really like the approach of always learning, and the Microsoft CEO's, his idea of what kind of organization he wants can really give us an idea of what kind of people we would want to hire, what kind of people we should aspire to be, the learners instead of the people who know and stop learning. And learning is just something very critical. I mean, you're listening to this episode right now, so you definitely value learning. And another way you can learn, in addition to listening to podcast episodes, is to read books. So with that in mind, I'm wondering, David, if you could share with us 3 books that you believe will have a positive impact on us.
Yeah. Give me just a thought. I mean, I think, so as you mentioned, Kelly and I just published The Expertise Economy. I'd certainly hope that everyone would be able to go and read that and find, more in there about how they can really use this to stay at the top of their game. I think, let me think. I have the goal every year to read a book a week. So I'm always trying to read quite a bit. I think some of the ones, I'll go to 2. One is Algorithms to Live By. And it's really about, very similar. It's about creating frameworks in our lives. They use very daily sort of pedestrian examples of how to do it. It's like, how do you know whether or not when you're in the city and you need to find a parking space, you're 6 blocks away from your venue, but there's a parking spot open. Should you take that parking spot, or should you risk driving on, skipping that one, and maybe not encountering another one? And they talk about how a lot of these just daily things, how algorithmic thinking can help, and some rules of thumb. And it's actually been really informative for me, and I found myself going back to it a lot. Another one in there, very practical, so I'll go back to one of the ways that's helped me in my career, is how do you know when you're interviewing people whether you interview someone and you like them? Do you hire them? Or do you keep interviewing in the hopes that, yes, while I like this candidate, I might find still yet a better candidate? So do I extend the offer to this person I like, or should I keep going? And if the answer is keep going, well, keep going for how long? And, and there's a whole field of mathematics that explored just that question. And I've gone back to it several times as we've had to hire candidates. I encounter someone, the second interview I do, I like them. And it's given me that rule of thumb to know, when you should keep interviewing, how you sort of deal with those kind of problems. So I really like that one. Then maybe the other one I would share with people is, oh man, I'm blanking on the title, but I loved it. It was the Dictator's Handbook. Why bad behavior is almost always rewarded, and why bad behavior is almost always good politics. There we go. So the Dictator's Handbook. Now this one takes us a little bit out of sort of professional career. It's sort of what Malcolm Gladwell did to psychology. Dictator's Handbook is to sort of political science. It's sort of a really fun way of approaching some of the questions that's happening right now around the world. We're seeing, right now, Brexit. We're seeing sort of these shifts in the world and how people are dealing with geopolitical issues. And I just thought it was a really fun approach to understanding some of these shifts. I'll give you one more example that's just really fun, is they talked about how more than even types of government, that there's these other things that play into how countries develop, how laws are formed. And they have this anecdote about how in every country, you can tell a lot about the form of government by how straight the roads are between the capital and the airport. If you have a straight road between the capital and the airport, it is a government, that essentially can overrule the rule of law, of private land, of sort of all of those things. If the roads are windy and diverging, then you have a country where power is still vested in the people. So just interesting sort of anecdotes like that help you appreciate some of what's going on.
Thank you, David, for sharing those interesting books. I don't know if I've ever heard of those on Breakthrough Success, and we've had a lot of guests on, so thank you so much for sharing those books. All those will be in the show notes, markguberti.com/E319. We will also throw in content marketing secrets for people who want to learn how to grow and monetize their content brands. And reading books is definitely a great habit. You mentioned you try to read one book every single week, which is a really great habit. But I'm wondering if you could share with us any of the other habits that you consider essential to your success.
Yeah, here's one of my favorite that I've held on tight, and I think people, it's very liberating. If you will read everything you can get your hands on a specific topic for 2 years, that's sort of become my rule of thumb. If you'll read everything on a specific topic after 2 years, you are amongst the most knowledgeable people on that topic essentially in the world. I mean, you can make yourself, it's sort of, Malcolm Gladwell talked about the 10,000 hour rule about developing mastery and how it takes practice. This is about sort of expertise, and 2 years, dedicate yourself to a topic, and you can go anywhere in the world with the foremost experts and be able to converse and be a leading authority. And I've just found that actually it made this feeling of experts always felt like something you have to be a PhD, or you have to be working at the biggest company. You have to be at a NASA, a rocket scientist to be, sort of truly a global expert on something. Well, I've really found it's much more accessible than that. 2 years, read everything you can, and you become a global expert.
David, thanks for sharing with us that great habit. I like the idea of it's a full immersion into a certain skill that you want to develop. And if you want to be successful, I mean, it is full immersion into what it is that you want to be successful at. So definitely a great habit there. And I'm appreciative of you sharing that and all of your great insights with us. Before we wrap up this episode, though, and get to the part where we let all the listeners know where we can find you, what do you believe is one question that we need to be asking ourselves more often?
Yeah, what is something that everyone else believes is true that I disagree with?
David, thank you for sharing with us that great question, all of your insights throughout our time together. If you guys want to learn more about David, get your copy of The Expertise Economy, How the Smartest Companies use learning to engage, compete, and succeed. The book that he co-wrote with Kelly Palmer. But in addition to your book, where are some of the other places we could find you?
Twitter at David Blake. You can check out Degreed in my profile there, degreed.com/David Blake. Or hit me up on LinkedIn, /IN/David Blake.
David, thank you so much for sharing all of your great insights on breakthrough success. Once again, it was such a pleasure to have you on the show.
A lot of fun. Thanks so much.
Want to dominate the podcasting industry? Now you can with your free copy of my book, Podcast Domination. You'll learn how to launch, grow, and monetize your very own show. And whether you are a beginner or an expert, this book has a lot of golden nuggets for you. We'll cover the cost of producing this book. All we ask is that you cover the shipping. To get your copy, head over to markguberti.com/PD.